Going into 2022, I told myself I'd branch out and try out some games that normally I'd either put off indefinitely or games I wouldn't even be interested in, because I often feel like my mindset is too narrow as I play a lot of the same simple games, and even Deltarune is guilty of this as much as I love it. So for today I wanted to take a look at something completely new to me, and it just so happens that OneShot fits that bill. I know of the game's concept and main character, but not a whole lot past that. I picked it up a while ago on the Steam Winter Sale as I've wanted to give OneShot a shot for a while now. Thank you, I'll be here all night. RPG Maker games have always intrigued me for many reasons, one of those being how so many developers are able to create such unique games with a seemingly limited engine. Although I imagine most of these developers come to RPG Maker for its easier to understand setup than most programming engines, there's a lot of creativity in the RPG Maker space, and that's something I can highly respect, and OneShot is no different from the rest in that regard. There's actually two versions of OneShot out there, the original free release and the 2016 remake released on Steam. The original version of the game is much shorter and contains a lot less of the story due to constraints that the developers had at the time, so the remake was their chance to greatly expand upon the story, world, characters, and more. One interesting difference between the original and the remake though is that the title of the game is taken a lot more literally with the original release. You actually only have one shot to beat that game. Upon closing it, it deletes any progress you've made, and if you do beat the game, then you can't replay it. Understandably, the developers saw this as a harsh punishment, too harsh for the full paid release, so ultimately that concept was cut out. You can actually still find the original version of the game up on rpgmaker.net, which is a site that looks like it hasn't been updated since 2007, and I really hope it stays that way because I miss sites like this. For the sake of time, and my antivirus software being a pain in the rear, I won't be covering the original version of OneShot in this video, as I'm solely reviewing the remake because I feel like the plot is still going to be fairly similar in either version, unless I'm wrong about that, in which case, feel free to flame me for it in the comments. But let's just see what OneShot has in store for us. Upon booting up the game, we're greeted with this really eerie yet atmospheric track accompanied by some art of Nico. Really got me questioning what this game would be like, so let's find out, I guess. We follow Nico as they've just woken up dazed and confused to find themselves in a dark bedroom with a computer, a connected bathroom, and a locked door. Almost immediately, we're introduced to the game's primary mechanic of combining items, which as you can imagine we'll use this a lot throughout the game to solve various puzzles. By holding up the remote to the light shining in from the window, we can see 4 color-coded numbers on the remote, plug them into the computer, and we're given a message about how the world is on the verge of dying. Us as the player has a mission, and that mission is to help Nico leave this world, as somehow or another they've been transported here. Afterwards, the door unlocks and we gain access to another room, solve another quick puzzle, go to the basement, and we find a really big light bulb. How many Nikos do you think it would take to screw a light bulb into that ceiling fan? So we take the light bulb back up the stairs and use it to unlock another door, and then we find ourselves in the outside world. This is where things got a little weird for me, because I had been expecting this game to be very much linear, but we're given a decently big area to explore right off the bat. It's a very empty wasteland with lots of broken down robots and weird cosmic chasms strewn about, but still a lot different than I thought it would be. Soon enough, we run into Prophetbot, who tells Nico about their mission, which is to take the comically sized light bulb and bring it to the tower, since their world lives and thrives off of it. And while this might look like a comically sized light bulb, it's actually their sun, and without the light from the sun, the world has to rely on the phosphors in the ground to provide enough energy for it to survive. Unfortunately though, that energy is very limited and won't last much longer without the sun. Nico is then informed of our existence because apparently we're some kind of a god to them. I guess since we're the ones controlling the game in some way. I don't know how that works though. So it's our job to help Nico bring the light back to this dying world and somehow get them out of it in the process. The gameplay of OneShot is broken down to a lot of exploration, as you'll find key items that'll help you solve puzzles through more exploration and chatting with robots and other characters. This would have gotten tedious pretty quick if not for the fast travel feature the game has, because as I said, the areas you explore are sizable and it can be kind of easy to completely miss certain items. I didn't have too much trouble with the puzzles. Most are fairly straightforward since you just have to use the combined mind mechanic quite a bit. Although certain combinations I just happened to randomly guess, like using the screwdriver on the camera to get the lens. Like, in what scenario would you genuinely think to take the lens out of the camera anyway? I mean, in context, I think this is probably the most random combination in the game. Nonetheless, the simplicity of the puzzles doesn't make them any less satisfying, and it's kind of refreshing to be able to play a puzzle game where I can actually enjoy it without having to look up a guide constantly. Occasionally, you'll be presented with a different type of puzzle though. Here and there throughout the world you'll find computers, and if they're turned on you can access them and they'll give you instructions for a puzzle in another area. However, the solution to these puzzles aren't located within the game since the computer is talking to you, the player, and is therefore aware that you're playing the game on a computer, so it hides the puzzle solutions on said computer, if that makes any sense. So for example, the first computer puzzle tells you that you'll need a code to open a safe, and this code is hidden in a document on your computer. At first I wasn't sure what I was looking for because I did physically check my documents folder, but I didn't see anything. This is one of the few times that I had to look up a guide because I just happened to miss the file, because that folder also happens to house all of my video files for my channel, including Vegas Pro files. I don't think this is gonna be a problem for most people, that at least it shouldn't be a problem, but like, it was a little bit confusing regardless because the game doesn't give you a hint on what the file is named, but I could only assume that was the point, and that's kind of funny honestly. Still, I don't see games do fourth wall breaks on this level very often, so I like it. It acts as a reminder that we're actually helping Nico along the way, which makes me feel like I'm needed somewhere for once. This did make the game somewhat awkward to record though. I had to constantly switch to display capture to capture some messages that are sent outside of the game's window, so I apologize if I butchered the video quality because of that, but I can't really do anything about it. Thank you, OneShot, very cool. One thing I love about OneShot is the aesthetic. The music gives off this vibe of curiosity as you explore, always making you wonder what's up ahead, and the art makes wonderful use of the palette. Visually speaking, the game's first area, Barren, is yeah, it's pretty barren, but it works well to set the tone of the game because it's mostly empty of life apart from a handful of leftover robots. It's unclear whether or not the Barrens were always like this, but it still acts as a good initial reminder seeing as the world is going to die soon and all. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but you'll notice that the Barren is the most dim area in the game, while the next area, the Glen, is slightly brighter, and then the Refuge is the brightest area in the game. Just a neat little detail. I found myself captivated with this world right from the get-go too, although one thing I wasn't huge on was the lore that's found throughout some scattered notes. It just makes it harder for me to piece together stories whenever a game does this. Like, if a game has to do it, I'd at least like a way to be able to easily view all of the notes I've collected, but nonetheless this world is an interesting one. We learn early on that simply bringing the sun to the tower might not be enough to restore the world to its former glory. Throughout the game you'll find many characters reiterating this message that the world is decaying, and these squares are in the most part to blame for that. Anything that touches them is just messed up, so a lot of the land or infrastructure is either gone or rearranged in some form. Although what actually caused these squares to appear is kind of unclear, so these squares caused this decaying, and apparently it's so severe that even the sun might not be able to reverse it. It kind of gets more and more depressing as it continuously builds up throughout the game. Despite the people's feelings towards the world though, you still see some trying to make the most of the situation, living each day on until, well, the inevitable happens. Although considering how long they've had to deal with the idea of an impending doom, at a certain point it had become background noise to me too. Regardless, I loved the world of the game. I found myself talking to any NPCs I could find because it's genuinely just fun to strike up a conversation with anyone in this game, even the emotionless robot dudes. Oh yeah, that's another weird thing about the world. It's made up of robots and various other species. You'll notice this word tamed be thrown around a lot whenever referring to robots because some of these robots are tamed and others aren't, and if I had to guess, tamed robots are probably the ones that can go against their programming, and non-tamed robots can't, since we come across a lot of robots that are in this kind of situation. But yeah, the writing is definitely one of the game's strong suits, which I'm really happy about. Typically I'm not the kind of guy I had to actively go out of my way just to talk to NPCs, part of my motivation was for getting extra puzzle hints, but there's just a cool cast of characters and different species in OneShot. I do wish we got a bit more time with some of them. Alula and Calamus were two characters I loved seeing interact with Nico just because of their childlike wonder and positive mindsets clashing with the depressing moods we got off the bat from the Barons. Oh, and that brings me to Nico, who I haven't really talked about so far, but Nico is basically the messiah of OneShot's world, despite the fact they're literally a child. This is something I kept having to remind myself of, because thinking about this already depressing world and putting a child with no understanding of it in said world, and expecting them to come out feeling the same and completely okay with themselves is just... I feel bad for Nico, alright? I mean, just imagine how you'd feel if you were yanked out of your home, your comfort zone, and zapped into some strange new world where everyone expects so much of you. Nico quite literally has the whole world on their shoulders, and for a child, they take it pretty well. I mean, granted, they are aware of my existence and thus have interacted with me a lot, so having someone else there to take on the journey with you would make things less daunting, I think. Even still, being a complete stranger, you'd have to put a lot of trust in someone to be okay with that. Like I said, throughout the adventure we help Nico through various puzzles that on their own they'd be completely unable to bypass, and so it creates this kind of fun dynamic that I don't think any other game could pull off, at least not as well as or as consistent as this. A handful of times in the game you come across beds, which I think in the original version are meant to be the only save point, but you can close the game at any time to save in the Steam version. Now I tried to only save when Nico was tired enough to take a nap though, because you can have some unique conversations with them each time you reopen the game. I really like these moments. It's an optional way to get to know Nico better, and even though they might prefer pancakes to waffles, I really like Nico as a main character. The story for OneShot admittedly really confused me. Although I could tell it was building up to something a little different than I was first expecting, the end segment of the game is really cool. Because of this, I kinda hate to spoil it for anyone who's new to the game, but I really want to talk about it, so skip ahead if you'd like. So Nico and I travel through the Barrens to the Glen and finally arrive at the refuge where the tower resides. With the pressure and the weight of this entire world on our shoulders, we take the first step to getting inside of the tower by closing the game. When we reopen it, things aren't quite what we thought. The story is quickly put to a halt and Nico is told they've saved the world and that's it, so they go to sleep and the game closes. It's pretty obvious that something is afoot, but there's quite literally nothing we can do about it. Unless? So this is when things get a little different, like I said a minute ago, because we're guided through some notes left behind by someone. After opening a separate program and relaunching the game, we're brought back to the world and plopped into a great big maze of hallways and doors. Fun. But not all is bleak, because we have even more notes to help guide us through the maze that also give us some background info on the entity, you know, the thing that's been speaking to us through the computers. I got stuck in this area for a while because I didn't actually understand that you're supposed to hover the note pages in a way so that the clover in-game fills the empty clover on the note pages. Yeah, that one made me feel really stupid to figure out given I had been running circles around the maze like 5 times. Apparently the entity that's been contacting us has always wanted us to fail the mission, and it wasn't always like this because it wasn't always sentient, but after gaining its sentience it only wanted death for everything and everyone, and to silence anyone who learned of its true nature. Further notes explain our predicament with the sun, saying that as long as the sun is intact, Nico will stay in this world. What we had to do to complete the mission was never explicitly stated past help Nico leave this world, although it was never very obvious that the entity wanted the world to die earlier in the game, or its predatory nature, so it's pretty clear now what we're dealing with. But in the end, we still have one shot, and it's up to us to make the final decision, which the entity can't stop us from doing. I really had to sit on the final decision for a little while because it's got a bit more of a punch in the gut to it whenever you know what'll really happen, but to be completely honest, I would sacrifice this entire world for the sake of Nico. Now get your stupid freaking light bulb out of my face and let this poor kid go home. So for real now, Nico finally gets to go home, and though I may have the blood of an entire world on my hands, I'd say I feel pretty good about myself right now. To be completely serious, despite some weird unanswered questions I have, have, I was really happy with that ending. It greatly delivered on those fourth wall break puzzles. Like, I thought it was so cool to have to use a separate program to get through the maze and solve the tile puzzles, and we even get to let Nico go home, but that does mean we can't play the game anymore since Nico is gone. Regardless of the fact, I loved OneShot. It really surprised me at every turn, making a captivating world, interesting characters, and an overall fun adventure with a lot of great puzzles and fourth wall breaks. To me, this is peak RPG Maker, and not as in the best of the best, because I am in no position to call those sorts of shots. I mean this as in what an RPG Maker game should strive to be. Obviously, I'm not saying to completely ditch RPG elements for every game. I think you get that, but my point is, a lot can be done with this engine. If this isn't a good baseline example of that, then I don't know what is. I guess that's it then. I don't have a whole lot else to say about the game, but I'd be lying if I said it felt a little incomplete, so here's where things get a little weird, because that's not actually the end of the game. Yes, I know this is a terrible transition, but I spent like 2 hours looking at my script thinking of a way to transition into the next portion of the game, and I could not think of anything, so forgive me. Reopening the Clover program we used to solve the earlier puzzles reveals 2 more notes saying that it knows we want more, so it asks us to try removing the game's progress log and see what happens, and after doing that we can actually play the game again. This is what's considered the Solstice run, and things get pretty weird pretty fast in this. At first everything seems the same, despite Nico immediately blurting out my name and being vaguely aware of specific story details, but once you get to the mine near the head engineer's house, that's when things get really weird. By opening the strange book that Nico woke up with while standing on a clover, we can reveal a minecart for this mineshaft, which leads us to a hidden room with a completely new character, Prototype. This guy gives us his main memory disk, telling us that some of his memories were locked for safety reasons, so we're tasked with restoring his memory by reconfiguring this machine to accurately track the residential area of the Barrens. After that's done, we load up his memory disk again, and we're then told about how he was built to be the prophet bot of the old world, as he puts it, the real world that ended before this one. This is around the point where we get a big old truth bomb, so I think that it'd be best if I explain the story, not only because I feel like you should experience everything in the Solstice run for yourself, but also because, I'm not even gonna lie, I have no clue how to talk about this otherwise. A lot of story clues are hinted through this run, with everything coming together at the end, and so explaining each area of the game would take way too much time and probably not be very interesting. Basically, the world we're in OneShot is fake. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but it's also fake for Nico and Prototype. Both of them don't belong in this world. Prototype tells us that none of the characters we met would be able to exist until I opened the program, otherwise known as the World Machine. So suddenly everything feels a little bit different, mainly for Nico because, like I said, obviously this game world isn't real. I mean, it's just like any other game, but Nico isn't like us. Nico has to physically traverse this world, and so things hit a little too close to home for them, and as it ultimately feels pointless. Nico was able to leave the world in the previous ending, but now they're brought back only to be told that all of that, every single bit of it, was pointless. Nothing mattered. But I guess in a way it does really matter now, since Nico wasn't really able to go home anyway, because it turns out that Nico feels like they haven't been home for a really long time. Throughout the rest of the Solstice run, a lot more of these squares show up to completely mess up any plans to truly save the world, not only consuming the robot lady and Prototype, but also collapsing a laboratory around another helper we need to save everything. Oh, and about that, all of this square mess is caused by the entity, or the World Machine, the thing handling all of the code for each character, area, and event. This is the same entity that's been talking to us through computers, and at this point, if it wasn't unstable before, it's on its last limbs now. Us straying off the intended path caused the World Machine to panic, which produced a whole bunch of the squares that collapsed the mine earlier, leaving Nico the only survivor. Okay, but why is this world even here if it's just fake? Believe it or not, it wasn't made to be a futile adventure. Initially, it was made as a place for the creator of the world to escape to because the real world was dying. They spent so long creating different iterations of the game world, trying to fix different bugs and create a stable version, but they weren't able to finish it because of the World Machine itself. You see, the squares are byproducts of the world's code going bad, and at first it was intentional. The World Machine would jumble up areas, bits of code, and this is what caused the creator to have to restart the world so many times. characters. It wasn't even done out of any malicious intent, it was just because it got curious. Eventually it spiraled out of control after the world's characters got too close to the squares, the broken code. It got even worse when characters would somehow become aware of who the world machine was because neither of their codes could handle it. A lot of the world's characters were lost from this, characters we never got to see. And then we have the problem of Nico. The world machine doesn't want any living being to come under harm, which is why it wanted the world itself to die. After all, nothing mattered except for Nico. Why should Nico have to suffer in place of everyone else? Never let a living being come to harm, its primary instinct. But the way the world machine is programmed, it has to violate that. Originally for the ending, we would simply put the sun in the tower, and then we'd wake up back at the house from the beginning, and then Nico would really be able to go home, like, for real this time. Shattering the sun was just the world machine's own workaround, which, well, you see how that turned out. The only true way of fixing this, the world machine and saving the world and Nico, is by taming the world machine. You remember earlier in the video whenever I mentioned what I thought taming meant? Turns out I pretty much hit the nail on the head there. Robots that aren't tamed are aware of the fact that they're a robot, but they can't go outside of their programming. However, through the process of taming them, they can. Taming means to treat these robots as real beings and spend a lot of time bonding with them, eventually enough so that the robot themselves believe they're real. And after doing that, we've finally fixed the world machine and they can finally remember this happier ending they lost due to the code corruption. Everyone from across the journey who we lost to the squares comes back in the credits roll, we place the sun at the top of the tower, and finally, truly save the world. The light from the sun destroys the squares, and everything's right. Everything is okay. And Nico can go home. For real this time. Although the world and the characters may be fake, the most important part of it all is the memories we make, and it might not actually be able to live on without us having the program constantly open, but at least it'll live on in spirit in our memories of the adventure. And that, for real this time, is OneShot. OneShot went from being a good game to me to a great game with the Solstice run. My first impressions of it as a new game plus, I guess you could say, were that I wasn't too impressed since everything just seemed like it was going to follow the same beats, but then it surprised me by not wasting any time just getting straight into the weird and wacky stuff. I guess not so much wacky, but you get the point. I didn't talk much about the in-between portions because honestly it's a lot more story focused than it is puzzle focused, and if I had one complaint about Solstice, it would be the lack of new puzzles. For the most part, you just play a fetch quest, and I'm not saying this to make out like it's super tedious. I really did like this run, I just kinda wanted one or two more new puzzles out of it. Otherwise, I loved it. The tension was high and it really paid off in the end. OneShot is a truly wonderful experience from beginning to end. Like, there wasn't a single hiccup and it constantly had me interested in what would happen next. It isn't the hardest puzzle game out there, but it's got a great story behind it, and I'd highly recommend you play the game for that alone. There's a lot I haven't specifically mentioned in this video, so if you haven't already considered it, then give OneShot a try. Heck, it's even coming to Nintendo Switch sometime this year, I think. Although I think this is the kind of game that's best experienced on PC, the problem I could see the Switch version having is with the fourth wall breaking puzzles. I don't think those would have the same kind of effect when they're not played on PC is what I mean. Still, the option will be there sooner or later. But remember, you only have one shot. Whoa, hey, hi, thanks for watching. I didn't actually intend on this video being as long as it is, so if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe or yell at me in the comments if you hated it. And goodbye, I guess.